Welcome to my YouTube channel where I discuss everything cybersecurity related, and I focus primarily on Microsoft security technologies. So if you are visiting my channel for the first time, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, smash the bell notification so that you get notified anytime we've got new content. Thank you for doing so, and stay tuned for this week's video. Welcome to this week's video. This week we're going to be talking about something very, very important, and I know it affects a lot of administrators, and that is this. Let's think about a scenario. Let's say you started off with a single account. Let's say, for example, that account was an Azure account, and you created a tenant, maybe even created multiple tenants in Azure. But as time goes on, as your business grew, you decided to maybe branch into other cloud providers. You got an account with AWS, you got an account with GCP, and you have some of your users are having logins in all of these accounts. Now that creates a very important problem, which is called password fatigue. That means for each account that you have, you are going to be creating a separate login for each account for all of the users. So what if there was a way to solve this problem? Let us see what we can do to do that. And that is the aim of this week's video. We are going to be talking about single sign-ons. In other words, creating one set of credentials per user that's going to rule all of your accounts. In other words, each user will just need to have only one credential to be able to log into maybe Azure, to log into AWS, and to log into GCP. So that's the aim of this week's video. So keep grab your seats, grab some popcorn, stay tuned, and we're going to go ahead to see how we can advise you on how to solve this problem. It promises to be a very interesting one, so please keep watching. Thank you as you do so. So in today's video, we are going to be looking at Entra ID Single Sign On or SSO. So let's get started. How are we going to be discussing this? First of all, we're going to be looking at what Single Sign On or SSO is. We're then going to look at the Entra ID SSO options. We'll then look at the prerequisites for implementing SSO in Entra ID. We will now see how to plan for deploying single sign-ons. And then finally, we are going to look at the scenario that we are going to be working with when we get into the console. That is the practical aspects of this video. That is talking about the scenario. So let's get started. So what is SSO? SSO is short for single sign-ons. It is a user authentication process permitting users to enter one username and password in order to access multiple applications. Now, the process authenticates the user for all of the applications they've been given rights to and eliminates further prompts when they switch applications during the same session. Now, SSO is useful when it comes to managing the number of times a user has to log on into multiple systems. In the process, it's going to be reducing what has come to be known as password fatigue, which could result from different usernames and password combinations and the time spent re-entering passwords for the same identity. So this method is widely used in large organizations where many systems are used by all of the employees. So if we have SSO, what that means is that the risk of password theft is significantly reduced as users are only required to remember one complex password. And then it will simplify the process of managing accounts and managing different kinds of access for the administrators. So what are the Entra ID SSO options? We're going to be discussing three of these options, and we're going to begin with the first one, which is the federated single sign-ons. Now, this type of SSO or this SSO option is a transformative development when it comes to managing digital identities and securing passwords. Now, it streamlines the authentication process across various service providers, thereby reducing the need for multiple passwords and decreasing the potential for security breaches. It also facilitates a user-friendly experience because it allows one set of credentials to grant access to different applications and different services, which can be especially advantageous for organizations that are operating on a global scale, having a diverse set of IT ecosystems. Now, Microsoft Entra supports federation protocols, and some of the protocols includes the SAML protocol, the WS Federation, and the OpenID Connect, which will together be acting as trusted intermediaries, authenticating users to applications using the Microsoft Entra ID account. This is going to now eliminate the need for multiple passwords, reducing the risk for password related breaches. And then federated SSOs will also facilitate better communication with security policies, providing a more robust audit trail than with traditional single sign-on or SSO solutions. Now, in addition to improving end user experience, federated SSO with Microsoft Entra also simplifies the administrative burden. And that is because it centralizes the management of user identities and permissions, thereby making it easier for IT departments to control access and to respond to security incidents. Now, the use of federated protocols also ensures that security measures are consistent and they are also robust across all of the connected IT systems. So that takes us to the next SSO option, which is the password based single sign on. Now, the password based single sign on is a user authentication process allowing users to access multiple applications with one set of login credentials. Now, this can be particularly useful for on-premises applications that are integrated with application proxies. And these application proxies will act as a bridge between the internal network and the cloud. So the initial login will require the user's credentials, which are then stored securely by Entra ID. And then subsequently, sign-ins that are automated. In this case, Entra ID will supply the credentials to the application, streamlining the user experience while also maintaining security. Now, administrators will benefit from this ability to manage these credentials because it will ensure that users can access necessary applications without needing to remember multiple passwords. And this will also enhance security because password management is centralized, and it also improves efficiency and user satisfaction because the login process is simplified. That takes us to the third Entra ID SSO option, which is the linked SSO. Now, the linked SSO is a transitional solution, and that is because it offers a seamless user experience during the migration of applications to new identity managed platforms such as Microsoft Entra ID. It also allows organizations to centralize and simplify access to applications that are yet to be migrated. Now, by integrating link-based single sign-ons, users can access a consolidated list of applications through the My App or the Microsoft 365 portal, streamlining the transition process. And then the process of account creation for a linked application can then be automated or it can be manually handled by an administrator post authentication. Now, it is important to note that linked applications are not directly integrated with Microsoft Entra ID's SSO capabilities. And because of this, conditional access policies and multi-factor authentication cannot be applied. So essentially, when a linked application is configured, it is the inclusion of a navigational shortcut for users rather than a full SSO integration. So this is particularly useful for organizations looking to maintain operational continuity while strategically planning the full integration of their applications with Microsoft Entra ID. So having talked about the single sign-on options, let us go ahead to look at the prerequisites for single sign-ons within Microsoft Entra ID. Now, for us to implement SSOs in Entra ID, especially when we want to integrate SSO between Entra ID and maybe another third-party cloud provider like maybe the Amazon Web Services, there are a number of prerequisites that we need to meet. The first one is, of course, we've got to have an Entra ID subscription. Now, if we do not already have one, we have to create an Entra ID subscription. Of course, there is a free option. We can get a free account that we can also use. Now, in addition to that, we also need an AWS IAM Identity Centre enabled subscription as well as the second prerequisite. Now, it's also important that within Entra ID, we need to have the appropriate permissions. And at the very minimum, we need to have the cloud application administrator role to be able to manage applications within Entra ID. So the integration process would involve adding the AWS IAM Identity Centre from the gallery to the list of managed software as a service apps within the Microsoft Entra Admin Centre. We'll also configure some of the SSO based settings and then want to test the setup with a user. All of this is going to ensure that users can be automatically signed into AWS IAM Identity Centre with their Microsoft Entra ID accounts, centralizing account management in one location. So the next thing we'll be looking at is how to plan an SSO deployment. Now, like we've already seen, SSO is widely used in cloud computing, where service providers through cloud service offerings will be delivering applications to users that are located anywhere in the world. Now, in this scenario, SSO can simplify the management of various cloud services and applications. And we are going to see that SSO is not a standalone technology, but rather it is a group of technologies collectively providing seamless authentication. So, for on-premises applications, SSO is usually implemented using Active Directory. An Active Directory is a directory service developed by Microsoft for Windows domain networks. However, with the advent of cloud computing, the use of Active Directory has been extended to the cloud with Microsoft Entra ID. So, implementing SSO correctly will now require us to carefully plan and to have some considerations related to security in mind. Now, while SSO can offer convenience and security, we also need to note that it presents some risk because it can become a single point of failure. So, if the SSO provider is compromised in any way, then what that means is potentially all linked services could be at risk. So, it becomes crucial for us to ensure that the SSO system is not just secure, but also robust with strong authentication methods and, of course, regular security audits. But if we implement it effectively, it can give us a seamless and a secure user experience across a multitude of web applications, whether they are hosted on premises or they are hosted in the cloud. So as the global landscape continues to evolve, then SSO technologies will continue to play crucial roles in managing access to services and protecting user identities. So in the next slide, we are going to be looking at the scenario that we want to be working with in the lab environment. So integrating AWS IAM Identity Center with Microsoft Entra ID is the scenario that we are going to be working with. And this integration is going to allow users to access multiple AWS services using a single set of credentials that are now managed in Microsoft Entra ID. So basically, the accounts will be created in Entra, and then we will be able to access specific resources within AWS. Now, in this case, we see that our login process will be simplified, and of course, that is going to enhance user productivity because the need for multiple passwords and login procedures will be eliminated. Also, on the administrative side, there will be more control over user access, and then of course we will have the ability to consistently create security policies across our various cloud environments. Now, when we integrate AWS IAM Identity Center with Microsoft Entra ID, it's going to allow us to control within Microsoft Entra who has access to the AWS IAM Identity Center. It will also allow us allow our users to be automatically signed in to the AWS IAM Identity Center using their Microsoft Entra ID accounts. And of course, we will be able to manage all of these accounts in one central location. So in the next part of this video, we are going to dive into Entra ID. We're also going to get into the AWS IAM console, and we're going to configure all of the settings, and then we'll go on and test these things to see if they work. So continue to watch this video as we do so. It promises to be even more engaging. So stay tuned. So we are in the second part of this video where we are going to be practicalizing everything that we've learned in the presentation part of the video. Specifically, we are going to be seeing how to integrate Microsoft Entra single sign-ons with AWS IAM Identity Center. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to see how we can integrate these two technologies together. So we're going to see how single sign-ons is going to be implemented from the Entra ID side, and we're going to be creating identities within the Entra ID side, and we're going to be using it to log on to AWS IAM Identity Center. Now, before we go on, there are a few things we need to take note of. One of it is the prerequisites, which we talked about. To get started, there are prerequisites, of course. And the prerequisite includes having an Entra ID subscription, which we have. If we go to the overview page of the identity section, we can see that we have the appropriate license here, which is Microsoft Entra ID P2 license. But of course, if you do not have a subscription, you can get a free one, and I'm going to be dropping the link in the description to tell you how to do that. Now, as you can imagine, the next prerequisite will be to have an AWS IAM identity enabled subscription, and to have that, you will need to have an AWS subscription, which we also do. Later on in the video, we are going to also talk about how you can enable the IAM Identity Center. So having talked about that, another thing we need to be aware of is you need to have the prerequisite permissions. And then in Entra ID, you would need to have at the minimum a cloud application administrator permission. In my own case, I have something a bit more than that. I am logged in as a global administrator. But again, you've got to take note that when you are trying to implement things, it's not best practice to always use the root or super administrator permissions whatever you are doing. Rather, you should be using the principle of least privilege, and you should only use the kinds of permissions that you require. But the minimum here is you need to have at least a cloud application administrator in Entra ID. And then on the AWS side, you need to have admin access to be able to do some of the things that we will be talking about. So we want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, having talked about the prerequisites. We want to, first of all, add AWS IAM Identity Centre from the gallery. And then to do that, we will expand identities, which we've already done. We will go to applications, and then we'll click on enterprise application. So the enterprise application console loads, and we can see all of the applications here. We have currently just 4 of them. And if we look carefully, we are going to see that there's nothing AWS related. So we want to go ahead and add that. I'll go ahead and click on new application. It takes us to the Browse Microsoft Entra Gallery, and I want to specifically search for AWS IAM. And we can see here that we have the AWS IAM Identity Centre, which currently is a successor to AWS Single Sign-Ons. I'll go ahead and click on select it, and it opens the flyout menu here. It gives us a name, and then of course it gives us all of the details here. I'll just go ahead and accept the defaults, and then I'll click on next. So it takes a couple of seconds to add the application. So once we've added the application, then we'll go and now look at the console again. We're going to see that it has added a 5th application to the 4 that we had already, and then we are going to be moving on to do the next things. So I'll go again and go to enterprise applications, and if I go and do a refresh, we can see here that we have AWS IAM Identity Centre added as an application. So the next thing I want to go ahead and do now is to click on the application which we just added. And the next thing we will be doing is we want to go ahead and enable single sign-ons. To enable single sign-ons, I have 2 options. I can click on set up single sign-ons by clicking on the getting started link here, or I can go to the manage area and click on single sign-on, which is exactly what I want to do. So that opens the AWS single sign-on IAM Identity Centre single sign-on page, where we have the methods which we also talked about in the presentation aspect. We are going to be using SAML, which is the one we are going to be demonstrating. Notice that there's a disabled option, there's the linked option, but I'm going to go ahead and choose the SAML option right here. So I'll click on it, and again it begins to load. So we have options here where it tells us to do a number of things, but I'm going to just switch consoles to go ahead and download the metadata file, which I'll come and upload right here. So I'll move on to the AWS Management Console. I'll click on services, and then within the services I want to select security, identity and compliance, and within the security, identity and compliance page I want to go ahead and select IAM Identity Centre. So I'll click on it, and it opens the IAM Identity Centre. It's loading fully. So we can see here that before we can begin to use the IAM Identity Centre, we first of all have to enable it. It tells us that the center makes it easy to connect an existing directory or to use a built-in identity center directory to manage user access to AWS accounts and cloud applications. So I want to go ahead and click on enable to enable the IAM Identity Center. Now we see here that it tells us that we've successfully created the organization instance of IAM, and it gives us a code. So now we want to perform some settings in the IAM Identity Center. And to do that, I have 2 options. on the left menu, I can go under dashboards and click on settings. And then to the right, I can go to the settings summary page and still click on go to settings. Either one is going to achieve the same purpose. So I'll go ahead and click on go to settings. Now, in the go to settings page, we can see that we've got a number of settings here, but specifically, I want to go to the lower part of the window and ensure that the identity source tab is selected. Now, we have a flyout menu to the right. I'll click on the actions flyout menu, and then I'll go ahead and click on change identity source. Now, this opens the choose identity source window. It tells us that the identity source is where we need to manage users and groups, and then we want to use IAM Identity Centre to manage permissions for users and groups within our identity source to be able to access AWS accounts and cloud applications. We also see that there are three options here. We have the Identity Center directory, which allows us to manage all users and groups in IAM Identity Center. We have the Active Directory option, which allows us to manage all users and groups in AWS Managed Active Directory. But the one that is of interest to us is the External Identity Provider, allowing us to manage all users and groups to an external identity provider. So having selected that, I'll go ahead and click on next. Now we see it takes us to the configure external identity provider option right here, and then we will now, there's the metadata file that I talked about, which we would need to use in the AWS, in the Entra ID Management Console. So I'll go ahead and click on download metadata. It prompts me with a warning. It tells me that it could harm my device. Do I want to keep it? Of course, I say I want to keep it. So I'll go ahead and click on keep. And it goes to download the metadata file. And this here is the metadata file that we want to use. So I'll go ahead and click close to close the window. And then I'll switch back to the AWS Identity to the AWS Identity Center SAML-based sign-on page of Microsoft Entra ID. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to click on upload metadata file. So I click on upload, and I'm going to browse to the location where we have the metadata file. I'll click on add, and then it adds the basic SAML configuration. Now we can see here that there are lots of parameters that it populates for us. The other option, of course, if you don't have a metadata file, will be to manually impute all of these options. But of course, I usually try to refrain from some of those manual settings because anything that involves human intervention is usually prone to error. So I'll just go ahead and save this, having updated the metadata file to our Entra ID console. So it's saving the configuration, and then of course I'll go ahead and close this, and we can see that the configuration is set. It prompts me to test single sign-ons, but I'm currently not prepared to do that at the moment. So I'll go ahead and say no, I'm going to test this later. So I'll click on no, I will test this later. Now, there's also something we need to download from the Entra ID console. So if we scroll down, to just a minute, the SAML certificates here, we can see that we have an option for Federation Metadata XML, which I want to go ahead and download. So I'll go ahead and click on download, which is going to download that. And like before, it warns me that the file could harm my device. I say, okay, I want to keep it. And this time around, I'm going to be switching to the AWS Management Console, and I'm going to go ahead and upload the identity provider metadata. Now it tells us here that AWS requires specific metadata provided by identity provider to create trust. So like we had before, we have the option of specifying the sign-in URLs and the issuer URL manually. But of course, since I've downloaded the IDP SAML metadata, I'll go ahead and upload this. So I'll click on choose file, and this time around I'll select the file and click on open, and I'll just go ahead and click on next, and we can see that we've got all of the settings available here, and it tells us to review the following consequences of our requested source change. It gives us a warning. I want to go ahead and accept by typing accept, and then I want to go ahead and click on change identity source. So it goes ahead to perform some configurations, and we are successful here, and we can see that it tells us that we successfully changed the identity source for IAM Identity Centre to an external identity provider. So the next thing I want to do from here is to turn on automatic provisioning. Now, when our identity source is set to an external IDP provider, it tells us we can configure how best to provision all of our users and our groups into an IAM Identity Center, and that's going to make assignments to the AWS account or cloud applications that we have configured. I want to go ahead and click on enable, and then from within the enable, it gives us some parameters here like the SCIM endpoint and the access token. So I'll just switch back to this console right here, and I want to now go ahead and configure provisioning also in the IAM in the Entra ID Admin Centre here, because the parameters I'm going to be picking from the AWS Management Console, I'm going to be adding it here. So it tells us that this is the AWS IAM Identity Centre overview. I want to go ahead and get started with the provisioning. So like I had turned on provisioning mode to be automatic in the AWS IAM Identity Centre, I want to come to the console here in Microsoft Entra ID and then do the same thing. I'll turn on automatic as well. Now, after I've turned on automatic, it prompts me to input some specific details. So I'll go first with the tenant URL. I'll go and copy that. That is the tenant URL here. I'll copy it. I'll paste it here. And then I'll go ahead again and show access token, which I'm going to copy. And then I'll come here and paste this. Okay. So now that I've done everything here, I want to be sure that the connection works. So I'll go ahead and click on test connection. So successful, it tells us that the supply credentials are authorized to enable provisioning. I want to go ahead and save. Okay, so we've saved. Now the next thing we want to do is to provision a user which we want to send to AWS console from here. So to do that, I want to go to users. I had already provisioned a user, and I'm not going to run through the details of provisioning a user in AWS or creating a user, because I had already done so in a previous video, which I'm going to be dropping a link to in the description. So if you're interested in knowing how to create a user in Microsoft Entra Admin Console, go ahead and refer to the video. So we've provisioned. The next thing we want to do is we want to manage our users and groups. So I'll click on users and groups. Now, what we want to do here is we want to we want to add a user that we are going to be provisioning to be able to implement, to be able to test the single sign-ons in AWS Admin Console. I had already created the user and we'll just go ahead and add it here. So I'll click on Add Users and Groups. We can see that there is no user assigned right here. And then I'll go ahead and click on the non-selected link, and it prompts us to select a user. I had provisioned the user earlier on called John Doe. So I'll go ahead and select the user. I'll click on Select. And then, of course, it tells me to assign the user. I'll go ahead and click on Assign. So it tells us that the assignment is successful. Now, the next thing we want to do here is we want to do another provisioning here. And in this case, of course, we want to click on Start Provisioning. And what that Start Provisioning button will do is that it will send the user which you have assigned from the Microsoft Entra ID Admin Centre, and it's going to send the user to the AWS Management Console. And then, of course, after that is done, we are going to be moving on to the next step. But so you know, provisioning takes some time. Sometimes, of course, you may want to do an on-demand provisioning. But in this case, of course, since it's the first time, I want to click on Start Provisioning. So I'll go ahead and click on Start Provisioning, and the process of provisioning will start. So we are going to be holding on for a while. Once that is done, we're going to come back and move on to the next steps to be able to finalize what we have started. So please stay tuned. Okay, so we are back to the console. Let's go ahead and do a refresh to see how our provisioning has gone. So I'll click on refresh. And sure enough, we can see that we have one user that has been refreshed here. So we can see that we have one user, we have 100% completion rate, and there are no errors. So to go and see the user, we'll switch to the AWS Management Console. So I'll go to the console, I'll just close this, and then we just want to go to Users. So we can see here that without having to do anything in provisioning the user has been replicated into the AWS console. So after we have done that, there are still a few more things that we want to do. So I want to go ahead and add the user to the appropriate AWS accounts. So I'll go and click on AWS accounts. And I want to select the particular AWS account that I want to add the user to. And then I want to go ahead and click on Assign Users and Groups. So I want to go ahead and click on Users and Groups. I want to click on Next. And now it tells me that I should assign permission sets to the organization, which is Outlook.com. There's currently no permission set, so I want to go ahead and create one. So I want to click on Create Permission Set, and then it opens the Select Permission Set type in a different tab. Now there are two types of permission sets, and permission sets basically will have policies which will be determining the permissions of the users to be able to access the AWS account. Now there are two types of permission sets. We've got the predefined permission sets, and then we have the custom permission sets. In order to simplify the configuration, I want to go ahead and select the default here, which is the predefined permission set. We can see that we've got different kinds of policies for the predefined permission sets, depending on the kinds of activities that the user will be performing within the AWS Management Console. So we can see here that we've got all kinds of policies, administrator access, billing, and that again is going to depend on what you want the user to be performing within the AWS Management Console. Again, I'm going to go ahead and still say that you've got to be very sure the level of permissions. You don't want to assign too much. Rather, it's better to start small, and then as the user has more responsibilities, then you can go on and grow the permission set. But in this case, I want to keep it simple. I'll allow the administrator access, which will be giving full access to AWS services and resources. I want to go ahead and click on next. Now you have to give your permission set a name. It tells us that the name you specify for this permission set will appear in the AWS Access portal as an available role. Well, to be sure that I know exactly what's going on, I'm going to go ahead and append Entra ID to the permission set name, and then we can see all other kinds of settings. We see the description here, which is optional, but again, for best practice, while the description option is there and it's not enforced strictly, I would recommend that you go ahead and always add a description to whatever object or whatever identities you are creating. That way, whosoever picks it up at a later time, or even if you don't work in the organization anymore, is going to know exactly what you were trying to do. This point here gives you the session duration, which gives you the length of time a user can be logged in before the console will log them out. And in this case, it defaults to 1 hour. So we also have the option to add tags. Tags basically are key value pairs that you can use to associate not just with permission sets, but indeed to whatever object you have within the AWS console. But in this case, I'm going to just keep it simple, and then I'll go ahead and click on next. So here it takes us to the review screen, and you want to check that everything you've done is the way you expect it. If it is not, you have the edit buttons at the start for step 1 and step 2 that can allow you to go back and change things so that it will be exactly how you want. So I'll go ahead and click on create, and sure enough, our permission set is now created. So we are back to the permission set screen here. We've created it. So we want to go ahead and do a refresh. So now we see the permission set that we created. We want to go ahead and assign this permission set to the user. So I want to go ahead and click on the permission set. I want to go ahead and click on next. And it gives us a review screen here. We can see the user we want to assign the permission set to. And then we want to go ahead and click on submit. So it tells us that we are configuring, and of course it has assigned the permission sets to the user. So we want to move back to our dashboard screen, and then we want to go ahead and test our permission set, and we want to see if the user can indeed log on to the AWS Management Console with the credentials that we created in Microsoft Entra ID. So I'll go ahead and copy the username. You can still notice that the username is the same as the one we created in Microsoft Entra ID. I want to come to the settings summary pane, and we can see here that there is something called the AWS Access Portal URL. So I want to go ahead and right click this, open it in a new in private window. I want to accept all of the cookies. And you can quickly see here that while we were trying to log into AWS Management Console, what it presents us with is a Microsoft sign-in screen. So I'll go ahead now and sign in with the username. I'll go ahead and also copy the password, and then paste the password here. And then I want to go ahead and click on sign in. So we've put in the username and password, and then of course it prompts us whether we want to stay signed in. I want to go ahead and say no. So I'll go ahead and click on no. And then it signs us in. So we can see here that we have access to the organization here. I'll go ahead and click on the organization, and it prompts us, see, where we can sign in. So I'll go ahead and sign in as the appropriate user. So it signs me in. Okay, and of course, we can see that we are fully signed in now into the AWS Management Console, and we have access to all of the resources that we have the permissions to be able to access. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you learned a thing or two. If you did and you found value, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. And of course, if you have any questions or have any comments, go ahead and drop those comments in the description box at the bottom of the screen. So thank you very much for watching, and keep a date with us next time. Bye for now.